Welcome to Teaching in Color, the podcast where we empower teachers, redefine education, and amplify voices. Here, we dive into real stories, bold conversations, and the challenges and triumphs of educators making a difference. Whether you're in the classroom, the community, or just here for inspiration, this is your space. Let's talk, let's grow, and let's make change together. This is Teaching in Color. Welcome back to another episode of Teaching in Color. I'm your host, Brandon Jenkins, and this is the podcast where we amplify the voices of educators of color, dive deep into their unique stories, and explore the power of representation. Today, I am extremely honored to introduce a guest whose journey is as inspiring as it is multifaceted. Garrison Thomas is an educator, public speaker, and a basketball player based in Canada. He's someone who's discovered his authentic self by pursuing his passions in every corner of his life. From the classroom to the court, Garrison has found a way to bring his best self forward. And we're lucky to have him share his story today on the podcast. Welcome to the podcast, Garrison.
Well, hey, thanks so much for having me, and what an intro. That was great. Thank you, Brandon.
Yeah, I'm so excited for today. This is our first kind of like crossover into like new territory, like internationally. I've never interviewed someone from outside of the United States, and I'm so excited for your perspective and this dynamic approach that you have to education, especially where you're based in Canada. You're in Toronto?
In Toronto, yeah, that's right.
In Toronto. Oh my gosh. Okay, so quick question before we start. As a Toronto resident, the only like representation that we have from Toronto in the US is obviously our good friend Drake. So do you often get like things about that down there? Like are you guys always kind of like brought that up?
So we do,
Or do y'all hate it?
No, it's good. It's good to be a little like Canada's so multifaceted.
Yeah.
Like, you think about how big the country in and of itself is, and Drake's from a little suburb just out the way here in Toronto. But you talk to people from Alberta or BC, where they don't really claim him like we do here. But you know what? Like he's really October's very own and Toronto's very own too. So
yeah.
We'll hold our L. I will say we'll hold our L against Kendrick there. But
okay,
still.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I always think about that, and I guess just like growing up, I'm like I never really got an idea of Canada outside of just
no,
that.
It makes sense. It makes sense because we still got we got Justin Bieber, we got the
yes,
Weeknd,
okay, yeah. Justin Bieber. I always forget he was from Canada. That's crazy.
Yeah,
but just like I said today, I'm so excited to really get into the conversation. We're going to turn the page and dive into today's conversation. So again, welcome to the show, Garrison. I always love to start off the podcast talking about the journey of how you became an educator, like what really prompted you and that passion and that fire. So, how did your journey as an educator begin, and what did that path intersect with your career as a professional basketball player?
Okay, well, that's a great question because it all really sort of intertwined. Like being such a high level competitor for a majority of my life, it kind of showed me what it takes to not only like pursue passion, but to be okay with the process and the progress of learning, developing, and growing.
Yeah.
Right? It's not always about the result. It's really about just accepting and embracing that delayed gratification. So working at something, even though the end game might be way over there. So I have a lot of teachers in my family as well. Like my grandfather is really a huge inspiration for a majority of my life, and I can definitely speak to him in a little bit. But my uncle was my grade 8 teacher as well, and I just saw how he operated and impacted people, and it was always a career path that I knew I'd end up in some way somehow, but it was just kind of a matter of when. So it was actually when the pandemic started that I changed lines of work and really started to pursue education, because I was actually working towards getting my teaching English as a foreign language.
Wow.
And I was planning on going overseas to Thailand actually to play some basketball. But when the world closed down, it kind of changed how everything and trajectory of it all. So I was like, you know what, why don't I do this properly? Because here in Canada, it takes 2 years to get a teacher's college degree, your Bachelor of Education, and you have to have a 4-year degree before that. So I completed my 4-year degree at university. Took a couple of years playing basketball and just being in the sports and event space. But then when the pandemic hit, I was like, you know what? I've always known at some capacity I was going to be a teacher.
Yeah.
So let's start this journey now, even though it was a little bit, a couple of years down the road. But couldn't be
Yeah.
happier with the decision. I didn't know everything that the education space really, really brought and could offer until I was in it. And then I was like, really, I've taken my career in whatever way that I can.
Yeah, I love that. I hear like it's almost like a running theme a lot of times when just in general, like when the pandemic happened, I mean, it was a lot of, like a reset for a lot of people. And I think that
Hmm.
it gave people the opportunity to really understand and like go forth for their passions. It's a very strange dynamic. I grew up in a household like full of educators as well. So, the product of education. And so for you as a student, as a child, you talk about having your uncle as your grade 8 teacher. How was that
Hmm.
dynamic? Like, was it very like familial, I guess, or was it more so like, hey, he definitely led you down the right path?
Both, honestly.
Yeah.
Like, and sorry, I say he's my uncle because it's just so commonplace for me to say that, but like,
Yeah.
he's just like another, like, really close family friend that I met when I was like 4 years old.
Yeah.
And we have a similar skin complexion and everything.
Hmm.
So it's just always kind of made that
Yeah.
connection. And like, his kids are my cousins and all that. So um, him being who he was really did shape me because he's very funny, like
Hmm.
objectively, and like always had the class like laughing. Teachers
Yeah.
love him. He's a pillar in the community. So it just showed me that again, I had teachers that I didn't love growing up, where I
Hmm.
was just like, this can't be what everyone's experiencing, or this shouldn't be done the way that it's going.
Yeah.
But my uncle kind of showed that there was a different pathway, and your personality can really shine through in this space as long as you allow it to.
I love that. And I think that's so powerful. And I mean, I think we hear like along the lines of education and having great educators really shapes you into becoming just like yourself, like someone who is profound and has an impact and a voice within education. But you talk about going, before the pandemic and before the world shut down, going over to Thailand to play basketball. And I'm assuming that basketball has been a very integral like piece of who you were and who you are. So, you lived in two very different but equally impactful spaces. As a teacher in Canada, how have you brought your unique background into the classroom? And how has it also like shaped your teaching style?
It's a great question. Well, first thing I'll say too is like being a highly like skilled basketball player to this
Hmm.
day, it's like it really does help me being able to walk into a gym and like have a
Yeah.
kid throw me an alley oop and then dunk it and
Yeah.
then have the kids go crazy and then other kids from the hall start to hear about it and so on and so forth. So that gives me some
Yeah.
points right away. And really, I kind of come out the teaching with the same approach as I do coaching, and then it's
Yeah.
about progress, not perfection, right? Like if you
Hmm.
practice, I tell my kids all the time, if you practice something 10 different times, 10 different ways, you're not actually getting 100% out of it, right?
Yeah.
You're continuously trying something 10 different ways, so that's only 10% of what you could be
Hmm.
getting out of something, right? If you get good habits, good healthy habits that'll allow you to become a better student, player, and overall person, that's really what it's about. It's about developing and helping the younger generation to kind of find their way through the world and be authentically themselves. Basketball has been a huge part of my life, and if you can't see it, this is my grandfather, Fred Thomas,
Oh my gosh.
um, who is the real person that I'm constantly praising and giving
Hmm.
flowers to. I never actually got the chance to meet him. He passed away on May 20th, 1981. But
Oh,
fun fact is that I was born on May 20th, 1994.
wow.
So having that like connection that I've always felt so close to and drawn to and connected with
Hmm.
someone that I'd never met, that's where my public speaking comes in. And
Yeah.
the conversations I have with my audiences is just thinking about the impact that you can have on people,
Hmm.
whether you mean to or not, whether it's positive or negative. We can all impact people around us, and so allowing that, like, and nurturing that, and having that help them make the right decisions down the road. That's really what teaching has been about me, and my education journey kind of
Yeah.
pertains to, listen, you're not going to remember what's on this test in 15 to 20 years, but I really
Yeah.
hope if we ever run into each other, you'll be like, oh, Mr. Thomas, hey,
Hmm.
I remember when you did this with the class. I remember how you made me feel. And
Yeah.
that's what my like ethos is as a teacher is just to make sure that we're I love the quote that someday you're just going to be a memory to someone, so make sure
Mm-hmm.
you're a good one. I think that that's a very true sentiment that
Yeah.
like I want to emulate through my teaching and let them know that I'm in their corner and like really care about what they feel about things and what they're like what's going on in their lives and how I can be a
Yeah.
positive in that space. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm hearing a lot of connection to like to connecting with your students and like getting to know them, but also like unraveling pieces of yourself so that way you are more human to them, I guess. Growing
Yeah,
up as
for sure.
as like a child for myself, like I can't even remember like having those moments with my teachers where they were kind of letting down the guard or the wall and like letting me
Hmm.
look into their lives. And I'm saying like, hey, like just little things go the extra mile, where you
Yeah.
talk about connection with your students and that love for basketball. And I'm going to tell you, like, we can teach all day and all day and all day, but when it comes to connection and learning and growing with our students, having that bond with them definitely goes the extra mile.
100%. And I think that barrier kind of drops down
Hmm.
with our generation of teacher because, hey,
Yeah.
like when we use Google Classroom and everything, they see our first names.
Yeah.
I didn't know, I can't tell you one of my teacher's
Yes.
first names that I had growing up, but they see our first names and like,
Hmm.
it's just a more accessible world that we live in and everything. So like my students look me up all the time and just find
Yeah.
random not so flattering pictures of me on Google playing basketball or whatever. But no, it's something that you just kind of got to roll with and
Yeah.
accept and honestly embrace just to make that connection clear.
Yeah, for sure. So, as we progress into our next question, this podcast is the huge theme of the podcast is representation and how we can push for educators of color to be an integral piece and part of the education system. You've got a powerful presence as a teacher and a Black male educator within Canada. How do you think your role helps students of color see themselves in spaces where they may not often be represented?
Yeah, to your point, I think that oftentimes students just kind of are waiting for someone who reflects them and who
Hmm.
just kind of understands like what it's like to not be somebody that they like they might have had a teacher, a white woman, an example
Yeah.
for here in Toronto. That's a
Hmm.
huge case for like primary teachers. It's like a
Yes.
majority of them are white women.
Hmm.
And so not only are people coming up to me saying, "Hey, you're my first male teacher in the sixth grade," the fact that I'm also biracial, it
Hmm.
gives them that like clarity and levity to like honestly, if you can see it, you can believe it type of thing,
Yeah.
and just not pigeonholing ourselves into certain positions or jobs or anything like that.
Yes.
And again, for me personally, like right now, it's what coming up on February in
Hmm.
Toronto. We don't get a lot of sun, so I'm not my
Yeah.
skin tone changes year round, right?
Yeah.
And it's actually funny because I do have like pictures of me and my fiance up in the
Uh-huh.
classroom where I'm full like just dark and a lot of melanin and feel it's popping and everything. And then
Yeah.
and I always say in the winters here I just get pale and frail, but
Yeah.
it doesn't mean that who I am changes,
Yeah.
right? That doesn't, I don't think of myself in different months as like a different
Hmm.
race or anything. I'm
Yeah.
constantly thinking of myself as who I am. And that
Hmm.
wasn't always clear to me. That's something that I had to grow into. So being able to tell stories to my students about what it's been like being biracial or talking to them about what can be expected of like what they can expect out of themselves and no matter who what they look like, right? Color,
Yeah.
creed, religion, anything like that. We just
Definitely.
want to reach and maximize our potential. So yeah, I'm a walking example of skin color doesn't matter because I'm a different shade throughout the year.
Yeah, and I love that. I mean, the demographic, I guess, in Canada, like you were saying, was in the primary, schooling. There's a lot of white women and white representation, but living in Houston, although the city is very diverse, we still have that same problem. I
Right.
remember
Yeah.
coming to my campus and being like, the only black male teacher that we have there, the only male teacher that we have,
Yeah.
and that first day of school, a lot of my students just being like, "Hey, you're like the first male teacher that I've had." They never explicitly said. I mean, kids know they never explicitly said, "Hey, you're my first black male teacher," but I know that was also tied into it, and so I
Certainly. Yeah.
think Yeah, I think like it's so important to be represented fully, not only for students that look like us, but for all students. And it gives that opportunity to see outside of like their realm and their lens, their perspective of their community themselves. Um, so I always think about that because I think like again, like Houston is so diverse, but we still have that same problem here.
Yeah.
Um, I kind of want to lean into a question that about like why you think there is so little lack of representation when it comes to Black and Brown educators or teachers of color.
Sure. Do you mind clarifying your question just one more
Yeah,
time for
yeah,
me?
yeah. What is there any maybe like stipulations or something that's like blocking the presence of Black and Brown educators or like teachers of color from coming into education or even like staying within education? Because I know for Houston,
Yeah.
oh
Sorry, go
sorry,
ahead.
I know for Houston, it's like there's we have like teachers coming in of color, but then they stay within education for about maybe a year or two. So we're not seeing like the longevity or the retention of teachers of color here.
Interesting. And see, you know what I think, like I can only really speak to Ontario's like
Yeah.
education system.
Hmm.
And I think it's that people who have been in this space for a very long time
Hmm.
are very comfortable being in this space.
Yes.
And they don't want to shake things up. They
Hmm.
don't want to, like, they are just kind of like counting down the days until whatever. And
Yeah.
like, that is what our generation of teachers is trying to avoid. It's trying to pursue passion. It's trying to interject that new life and new, right? Like I had a teacher actually once tell me that like you shouldn't stay at a school for more than 7 years,
Mm.
because you just get kind of complacent and you
Yeah.
don't start to look at how other things can go. And so I think that it, like the old guard, if you will,
Hmm.
is kind of a very dominating factor in this space. It's
Yeah.
because they've had the job for so long. And again, what we always say is like, oh, well, this is how we've always done things. But realistically, how we always have always done things, it hasn't always worked for everyone.
Hmm.
And yet it's about speaking up and advocating for change in order to actually make that change happen. Like in
Yeah.
this space in particular, if you want something to happen, you're going to have to make it happen.
Hmm.
That's definitely what I found in my 4 years of teaching, is like
Yeah.
you need to really want to get onto the other side of things, and you got
Hmm.
to want to actually lead the charge and pursue what it is that you need to get out of this career. And I think like the blocking points is like up at the top and in positions of power. These
Hmm.
people have been in those situations and positions for so long, and oftentimes take the more familiar way, or they take ways that they have known to be successful,
Hmm.
despite the fact that something else on the other side of that assumption could just be their best decision yet.
Yeah.
So I really think that that's what it boils down to, is just embracing the change and wanting to have that change happen.
And I love how you talk about change. I think, like, from my own experience, there's two kind of factors when it goes into like retaining and keeping teachers of color within the profession. It definitely has an impact on like financials. We know across the board that teachers aren't paid deservingly. And so for a lot of our, Black and brown educators, they come from households where they were, disenfranchised or low income households. So it's kind of, again, we want to say it's not for the money, but when it comes down to it, we're having to live just like everyone else. And then
Hmm.
secondly, I hear a lot of educators of color say, hey, like, I come into education, but what can I really change? And so that's the mindset that a lot of teachers may have. And I think that coming into it, you're already starting that change. You're already having that ball rolling. So it's just something to think about that I think about often, working in Houston and looking at different areas of the world where we're still having to kind of fight for a voice and a seat at the table. Um, so you talk about representation and being an advocate for change. And again, you have such a powerful presence as an educator in Canada, in Toronto, and also as a basketball player. How do you, what challenges have you encountered as an educator of color, if any? And how have those experiences kind of changed your passion or shaped your passion for what you do?
No, okay, that's a great question. And what I found is that I've been at a number of different schools over my years.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes I don't see myself reflected in a lot of the staffs that I'm
Yeah.
part of. Um, and that's kind of like where we need to look around and question ourselves. Like if
Mm-hmm.
every uh, meeting that we have is about like, oh, we need to get more representation, or oh,
Yeah.
we need more diverse voices, but we're looking around at who's giving the presentation and it's people that
Mm-hmm.
don't look like us,
Yeah.
right? So putting ourselves in positions to advocate and to at least speak out. What I found too is that a lot of the times things that are commonplace for people of color,
Mm-hmm.
they just kind of miss a lot of society because they didn't have to face that, or like they weren't faced in a situation where something had to be done or something
Yeah.
had to change or adjust. It's always just kind of been like, and actually, like speaking of Kendrick Lamar, I love the line that he has where he says, what community feels that they're the only ones who are relevant.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really kind of where I feel like we're at in 2025, is that
Mm-hmm.
we have people with like megaphones and speakers blurting things out louder than the people in the back,
Yeah.
even if they don't have a full picture of what's going on. Right. There are so many just blanket answers that we hear in this day and age. But at the same time, these are kind of nuanced conversations that we need to be having.
For sure.
So yeah, like I've definitely heard things from teachers in at a bunch of different schools I've been at, like saying different things about different like holiday traditions and like
Mm-hmm.
having issues with like how things are being portrayed and whatnot, just because again there's that little bit of change, there's that little bit of pushback that's happening. And you see people with the megaphones are up in arms about it and really loud. So again, the higher ups are then just like, oh, let's keep it quiet, let's keep it under like let's underservice this group in order to
Yeah.
appease another group. But I think equity is really about, at its core, about making sure that things are fair for everyone,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like yeah, we can go into further detail about like what equity can mean as in the education space, but just as a
Yeah.
whole, it makes sense that like if we have enough, then we shouldn't have to strive for more or take away from others,
Yeah.
right? There's enough, more than enough to go around for everyone, and especially in this space where it's information and education, like that's never going to stop happening. You can't go wrong with more education. So I think kind of keeping the eyes on the prize of understanding, like, listen, you can't change the world until you change yourself. And so if you need to make those like small incremental changes to kind of provide that platform for others, like you're doing, like I
Mm-hmm.
think that that's like an amazing service that that we're all capable of providing.
Yeah. Thank you. I think, yeah, I mean, again, we could talk about equity, like that would be a whole
Right.
nother literal series in itself.
I hear you for sure.
But one thing that I really want to um, kind of highlight what you pointed out was like putting ourselves within these boxes, and when we're coming into spaces, we're often put into boxes, right? I remember coming into my campus, and they were like, hey, do you want to, mind you, I'm like a second year teacher, so I'm like, this is my first year coming in, and they're already asking like, hey, can you do like the sports program? Can you,
Mm-hmm.
like, hey, we have this program here where we work with our behavior kids. Can you kind of like lead the charge on that or help in some capacity? And I already kind of knew like the trajectory of where that was going. So we're often pigeonholed into like these boxes of like, hey, as an educator or as a male or as a Black male or a male of color, you know, you can do this. You're a disciplinarian, right? Or you're an athletic figure, right? And so I had to sit down with my administration and be like, hey, one thing that I first of all, I've never played a sport in my life. So no, I can't physically do it. And then secondly, I'm not a disciplinarian of any sort. So we kind of have to stand up and use our voices to kind of advocate not only for ourselves, but for um, across the board. Every story is different. Every educator is different in how we approach things. But I think you're talking about using the people in the room and who's presenting these styles of teaching or culturally responsive teaching or diversity to our educators. They have to come from a place where they understand and know that. So I just thank you for bringing that onto the podcast, because I think that's very powerful.
Mm-hmm.
So, looking into our next question, we're kind of shifting into segment 3 here, where it's about balancing the passions that you have. So you're balancing public speaking, teaching, and professional level basketball, which is just absolutely incredible. I don't know how you do it, but it's amazing. How do you manage to give your all to each of these spaces without losing your authentic self?
I think the answer kind of lies in the question there. Like, this is
Hmm.
my authentic self.
Yeah.
I love to say that I can truly say that I'm unapologetically myself, and it
Hmm.
took me a long time to kind of accept and embrace that. Just having that dichotomy of being black and white, and sides pulling, and not enough for one side, too much for
Yeah.
the other side, all that type of deal. Um, but honestly, pursuing like your passion, it fills the cup,
Hmm.
right? It feels good to want to go out and do something. I
Yeah.
love playing basketball. Like, it's really a passion of mine, and
Hmm.
that's your story about like administrators asking you about the
Hmm.
sports and everything. I know exactly what you mean, because I
Yeah.
don't want to be pigeonholed in that space, but like,
But that's your passion.
I
Like,
love it. I
yeah.
love it. I really do. And like, I like the idea of like kids trying something that's hard and
Hmm.
being able to push them in a way that I can't push them in the classroom, figuratively.
Yeah.
But I'm saying, like, we're talking about working really hard at something, and then just being able to be like, hey, that wasn't good enough.
Yeah.
Let's try it again a different way. It's a different side that I can bring out, like, that only sports can really bring.
Hmm.
And whether, because again, not all my students even care remotely that I play basketball at a high
Yeah.
level. They're more like, I more so bring it to the idea that you have to, like, I always ask my classes, like, who here loves competition?
Hmm.
Raise your hand if you like to compete against something. Video games, like fashion space,
Yeah.
whatever. Like, do you like to compete? And then a majority of the hands go up. I'm like, that's a good thing.
Hmm.
It's a really good thing to want to compete against other people, but it's an even better thing to want to compete with yourself. If you can prove to yourself that you can accomplish something, do something hard, do something that you didn't think that you can do,
Yeah.
that's the definition of growth. And that's life, right? We're growing, we're learning, we're getting better. And that's everything that I want to instill in my students, is give them that confidence to know, listen, even if I don't win every single time,
Hmm.
I know at least I'm getting a little bit better. At least I'm improving. Even if I lose, I know what not to do for next time. And so, like, I'm staying very busy
Yeah.
with basketball and teaching, of course, and then factoring in that I'm an up and coming public speaker.
Yeah.
I've actually spoken to a few crowds of like over 100 people in my time
Wow.
public speaking,
Yeah.
and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the reason that my grandfather is such an important individual is that
Hmm.
he played in 3 different professional sports leagues in the 40s and 50s.
Wow.
Like, the same time that Jackie Robinson was breaking the color barrier in the States, my
Hmm.
grandfather was playing basketball, baseball, and football up here. He even got signed to the Harlem Globetrotters for
Amazing.
yeah, back in 1949. And that was the team, the Harlem Globetrotters team, that beat the world champion Lakers.
Wow.
So I did a deep dive on my grandfather's
Uh-huh.
history, because he was also a sergeant in the Royal Canadian Air Force by the age of 23, as a
Oh
black
my
man
God.
again. And like, the
Yeah.
policies that we had written in all of our laws and everything, I in my presentation, I highlight them. They're
Hmm.
racist, they're discriminatory, they say
Yes.
don't trust people of color. If you're in a hole with them, like, just know that they're
Hmm.
going to turn their backs on you. That was in our policies, right? Like, those are the things that I like to point out. In my speeches, I say, I'm not pointing any fingers, I'm just pointing out the obvious.
Yeah.
And just last year in 2024 October, my grandfather was inducted into the Canadian Sports Hall of Fame.
Oh my gosh.
And huge achievement, like, truly,
Yes.
it's the top honor in Canada that you can get. This was 70 years after his playing career,
Hmm.
and it was 40 years after his death. So even though it's a remarkable achievement, and again, I'm not taking anything away from that, I asked the question, like, why do we think that is?
Hmm.
Brandon, we bring it back to who's making those decisions,
Yeah.
right? Why was it this year? I give the whole presentation about how we went about getting him in the hall,
Hmm.
but and the people at the Canadian Sports Hall of Fame are amazing.
Yeah.
Like, they're fantastic. I've worked with them recently, just because of like this whole conversation that we had. It's a really interesting space to kind of be in and operate in. But the whole point to going back to, like, if you can see it, you can believe it. And
Hmm.
like, my grandfather, he really emulated that. I could go off for a much longer time period on this, but just to kind of circle it back to your original question of like, what my essentially how do I do balance everything? It's just it's just, this is exactly who I am. Who I've been
Yeah.
on this call is what you're going to get out of me in every situation. So I just want to continue to grow and like expand and push my limits, because I've never been a social media guy. This is
Yeah.
the first I've really made a point to make a presence online, because
Yeah.
look, I've always been this way, but I've never wanted to showcase it. And now I had a friend who told me, like, when I was public speaking, they were like, if you don't tell this story, that's you being selfish. Like,
Yeah.
people need to hear this. And I was like, that really stuck with me. And so this is me trying to make good on a promise I made to my friend and myself.
Wow. I love that. And I mean, in itself, I thank you for the work that you do. I just want to like kind of highlight that right here because thank you for the work that you do. I think that it's definitely inspirational and impactful to have that kind of drive and that passion. And I think that a lot of times when we, have that drive and that passion, it comes from a very, a place of, love, but also a place of like challenge. And I love that you're
Hmm.
challenging yourself to put yourself out there and push for change, and you've been doing this for a while. So it's amazing to see kind of that growth. So just thank you for that.
Thank you.
But as we move into the next question, you talk about how you embrace yourself authentically, and then how passion kind of like transcends that and embraces it. It's inspiring to see how you've embraced every corner of your life with that passion. If you could give advice to other teachers who are trying to stay authentic while juggling multiple passions, what would you say to them?
Um, I'd say be kind to yourself,
Mm.
right? We try to put so much pressure on ourselves to
Yes.
complete this task, especially as educators. Like, we're very task oriented. And
Hmm.
this is done, but that means this isn't getting done. And if that's not getting done, then so on and so forth. We just unravel. But taking that breath back and like understanding that, hey, if you give your best shot and if you truly give your best effort and put your best foot forward, then that's really all that anyone can ask of anyone,
Hmm.
right? Like we all deal with parents that lash out at us in ways that we of course don't deserve.
Yeah.
But that's just, I always tell my students, like, whenever people lash out at you, that says a lot more about them than it does about you, right? So
100%. Yes.
understanding, yeah, absolutely, and just knowing that internally, if you're putting your best foot forward and like staying up on most recent teaching practices, even if
Hmm.
that's just like factoring in the latest example of something that happened in the news. Like, I currently am a math and science teacher,
Hmm.
so I don't get to kind of talk about like world events all the time.
Yeah.
But in science, like if we talk about, like, I showed my kids the when the man jumped from the Red Bull
Yes.
thing from the atmosphere, because we were talking about space, and like these kids, like, they were born the year that it happened,
Yeah.
so they just, not a lot of them knew exactly what they were getting themselves into. But just like a fun way of, again, getting their interest and saying, hey, this, I remember I told them where I was when this happened. I
Hmm.
was at a bar with my friend. I used a different word, but still,
Yeah.
like, it was like they loved that. So I think finding ways to kind of show, not hide your personality,
Hmm.
and kind of bring yourself everywhere you go, is an easier way to avoid burnout, so that you're not thinking like, oh, I was faking it for the entire day today.
Yeah.
That's draining. Yeah, being someone that you're not is exhausting, because you're constantly having to put on a front or put on a facade.
Hmm.
But really, all you need to do is show up as yourself in a way that helps the students grow and helps the students see that, you know what, just like my uncle, anyone can be anything, right? You don't have to be like, you don't have to have a certain personality trait or be a certain race to like a certain subject,
Yeah.
right? You can do whatever you want to do, and really just showing people that is like the most important part too, I'd say. Finding a healthy balance in your life.
Yeah. And creating boundaries and, like you said, taking time for yourself, loving yourself, and being gracious with yourself. I mean, that's a big part of like, my educational journey in itself is like learning how to be happy with what you present and living authentically. So I mean, thank you for sharing that with our audience because I know that sometimes teaching in itself can be very, very taxing, and it can almost feel like a rat race in a sense.
Hmm.
So sometimes that educators just need exactly what you said and just for someone to share that with them. So thank you for that. um, But into segment 4 now, we're looking ahead into the future and kind of your journey as an educator, where that will take you. The sky is the limit. So, Garrison, as we look into the future, what is next for you, and what goals do you have, working in public speaking, maybe teaching, or even, your own basketball career?
Yeah, so basketball career wise, I'm good with where I'm at.
Mm-hmm.
I have an awesome time. I'm not looking to go play anywhere again because,
Yeah.
like what I found was that
Mm-hmm.
like I love basketball, like I really do, but I
Yeah.
didn't love being a professional. Everything
Yeah.
that went into that with like the money that you made here, the different languages of coaches, and you don't
Mm-hmm.
know that people have their best interests at heart for you.
Yeah.
So honestly, I was like, I kind of saw I don't want to say my ceiling as a like skill wise, but I saw a
Mm-hmm.
ceiling as a professional and kind of was just like, you know what, I'm good. My professional career is kind of where it's at.
Okay.
Three
Yeah.
on three tournaments whenever I can, but I'm not
Yeah.
looking to go for a full
That's
season
fair.
anywhere
That's
anymore.
fair.
Totally. But yeah, in terms of public speaking, what I'm actually working on right now
Mm-hmm.
is like my presentation called Getting to Know Grandpa.
Yeah.
It's me talking about what I learned while getting to know someone that I never met.
Mm-hmm.
My family is still based in Windsor, Ontario,
Mm-hmm.
which was one of the final stops on the Underground Railroad pathway.
Wow.
So a lot of recently freed slaves or refugees went over to this settlement in Buxton, Ontario,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where they set up shop. And my family's like history leads back to setting up that first school.
Wow.
There, yeah, and my cousin's currently the curator of the third National Museum in Buxton right now. So I've learned a lot about Canada, and I learned a lot
Yeah.
about like the rules and regulations and qualities that we once kept.
Mm-hmm.
And I know like to the rest of the world, we might be, I don't even know, you know better than me what the rest of the world would think about us, but
Yeah. Oh,
um, we got our, you know what I mean? We got our
yeah.
own history to kind of
Yes.
face. And I always talk about rappers, but like Jay-Z says, you can't heal what you don't reveal.
Yes.
And like if you're just going to sweep things under the rug, then you're never actually going to address them. And so this space has really shown me that like I can make an awesome impact. And it's like adjacent to education.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still like I supply what I'm working on right now to answer your question is video modules, so
Mm-hmm.
that I can present these when I'm not actually present.
Yeah.
This is a big online year for me, if you can tell.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get out and not just like do, because I've been doing this work for a long time in front of
Yes.
like large audiences, but
Mm-hmm.
I want to expand it. And I want people to learn about like it's about extending my grandfather's legacy, and in turn getting people to connect with others as well.
Yeah.
That's the crux of it. So I've been making lesson plans and assignments. We have a club at our school that I started called Unsung Heroes,
Mm-hmm.
where I introduce my grandfather as the prime topic, but then I ask my students to give me their unsung heroes, so they can make projects off of that and everything. So keep an eye out. That should be. I hope to be finished that by the end of the school year, like full courses and lesson plans and everything ready to roll out from a public speaking standpoint. And then from a teacher standpoint, I just want
Mm-hmm.
to continue to learn. I I'm going to be honest. I wouldn't call
Yeah.
myself an expert in this space because it takes years. It takes years of development and growth to kind of get to where you want to be as a teacher. But I'm going to give it my all for sure, and I'm going to keep trying and trying different things and different methods. And again, I personally think it's really about connecting with the kids and
Yeah.
making sure that like sure that they can read and write, but also that they're good people and that
Yes.
they'll actually have like life skills and can communicate with others. Like I have a community circle to start off my week and maybe one to end the week, but I
Mm-hmm.
always prompts the kids with, "Hey, good is not an answer in this classroom. I don't.
Yes.
Of course it was. Of course your weekend was good. Tell me specifically what was good about it. Was it a meal? Was it an activity? Was it seeing someone you haven't seen in a while?
Mm-hmm.
Did you?" I was like, "You can't say nothing because you couldn't. You couldn't have just been sitting waiting to come right back here. I don't buy that for a second. I don't care. Tell me about your Minecraft game."
Yeah.
Like, and just make joke. I'm like, I don't know what Minecraft is, and the kids are astonished every time. But I'm like, tell me about it. Like, let me learn through your eyes, and like,
Mm-hmm.
why do you love this game so much? So I think just being an educator, where I see that going, is just hopefully being a good memory for these students
Mm-hmm.
and leaving behind that legacy that even if you don't get to like see it through fully, you still get to know that you are impacting people down the road. So
Wow.
that's where see things going.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I mean, again, the work that you're doing is astounding, and I'm so excited. I want to see this journey, happen in tenfold. And I actually want to go visit this museum. I'm gonna reach out to you
Hit
for
it
that
up.
information because I want to visit.
Please do.
Yeah, but I mean, thank you again for the work that you do and the commitment and the passion and overall like the dedication to the work that you do. It's really inspiring, and I hope that our listeners today can take every piece of wisdom, of impact, everything that you shared, and it can apply it to themselves and see, not only their growth or your growth, but at their growth as well within it. So I just want to say thank you again, Garrison, and to our audience. Thank you for tuning in to Teaching in Color. Be sure to follow us, the podcast on Instagram, subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, and stay tuned for more stories like Garrison's. Until next time, let's keep turning the page and making our mark within education. Thank you guys so much, and thank you again, Garrison, for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Brandon. You guys
Of
take care,
course.
okay? Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye, guys.